The Philippines has called out China. China's response is clearly not good. CCP has a nasty habit of stretching its borders and claiming territories that don't belong to it. Unfortunately, it's made a big mistake by choosing the Philippines as a victim this time around. In the past couple of weeks, tensions have been really high in the South China Sea, as Philippine and Chinese Coast Guard ships are reporting multiple collisions in the region.
As a Chinese Coast Guard ship collides with a 97-metre Philippines vessel. The Philippines Coast Guard says one of its largest vessels sustained widespread damage.
Both sides are blaming each other for the collision. According to the Philippine government, the Chinese Coast Guard vessel hit a Philippine Coast Guard vessel 3 times.
First, real quick, we need your help. CCP bots are fighting hard against this type of content, and we need your help to fight them off. Please leave a quick like on this video to help us push against the YouTube algorithm so we can continue to bring you informative content. On the 19th of August, several Chinese and Philippine vessels collided near the Sabina Shoal, with the Chinese Coast Guard claiming that the Philippine vessel deliberately collided with them. The shoal, which has been claimed by China as Jianbinjiao and as Escota Shoal by the Philippines, is located some 75 miles from the Philippines' west coast and 360 miles from China. This incident was followed by a second round of collisions with both sides once again blaming each other. The Philippines claimed that the Chinese Coast Guard vessel 5205 intentionally rammed into the Philippines vessel. On the other hand, the Chinese claimed that the Philippine ship was illegally stranded at the shoal and deliberately rammed into them. Another incident also occurred on the 26th of August, where the Philippines claimed that 40 Chinese ships prevented 2 of their boats from conducting a humanitarian mission to restock the Teresa Magbuana, a Philippine Coast Guard ship deployed months earlier to the shoal. Again, China continued with its rehearsed defense that its actions on the sea have been professional and appropriate. The running theory by the Philippines is that China is attempting to reclaim land at Sabina Shoal, with reports that Beijing is using that raw material to expand the shoal. Of course, China's denied this, stating that the claims are groundless and unscientific. Although these are the most recent incidents, China and the Philippines have been at it since the beginning of the year. We'll start with a small incident in January, where a Filipino fishing boat captain claimed the Chinese Coast Guard drove him away from Scarborough Shoal and forced him to dump his catch into the sea. The Scarborough Shoal is a triangular reef formation that is a source of contention because of its rich waters and marine resources. It's been the site of a lot of Manila-Beijing disputes in the past couple of months, and in May, 200 volunteers and 100 fishermen broke through the blockade of Chinese vessels and reached the shoal. Back at the Second Thomas Shoal in March, Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels collided, injuring 4 Filipino crew members. Things got more dangerous in April this year when a Chinese Coast Guard ship fired water cannons at 2 Philippine patrol vessels near the Scarborough Shoal, which could soon overtake the Second Thomas Shoal as the 2 nations' biggest shoal fight. Again, in June this year, a Chinese Coast Guard rammed a Filipino resupply boat. The Chinese sailors were brandishing makeshift spears, which cost a Filipino soldier one of his fingers. The Philippine military chief, General Romero Brawner, stated that they were outnumbered and the Filipino crew had been unarmed and had fought with their bare hands. In response to these allegations, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said that Manila's comments on the clash were bogus and that the Philippines was to blame. According to them, Filipino boats have been ramming into Chinese vessels. Beijing wants us to believe that their Coast Guard has been professional and restrained during the confrontation, and that no direct measures were taken against Filipino personnel. As we can see throughout this year, the interactions have moved from microaggressions to full-on fights. With fights persisting from the Scarborough Shoal, the Second Thomas Shoal, and the Sabina Shoal, it's clear that the Philippines and China are not seeing eye to eye in the South China Sea. There's always been tension between the 2 nations. But the fight for the shoals intensified in June last year, when Chinese soldiers attacked Filipino sailors with machetes and hammers while they were on their way to resupply their soldiers stationed on a warship. Footage has been released by the Filipino military showing Chinese Coast Guard officers brandishing an axe and other bladed or pointed tools at the Filipino soldiers and slashing their rubber boats. China and the Philippines have been fighting a lot in the South China Sea, 9 times in just August alone. But you might not have seen that news, because a lot of traditional news organizations are not good at properly covering important geopolitics news. That's why I launched Global Recaps, a geopolitical newsletter that covers important geopolitical news in a simplified manner. Every evening, I send out an email directly to your inbox covering important stories that you can read in just a few minutes. Best of all, this is completely free, and you can sign up now by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code. Both sides blamed each other for the confrontation, but knowing China, this was definitely one of their acts of aggression. We would think that by now China would have managed to win this border dispute. China's been known to bully smaller nations into a corner, but surprisingly, the Philippines has been giving it a run for its money. After the incident in June this year, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. stated, "We will never be intimidated or oppressed by anyone." He's pledged to continue to exercise our freedoms and rights in support of our national interests in accordance with international law. This lets us know that these disputes are probably going to be going on for a very long time. Now, if you've been a loyal subscriber for a while, you'll know that this is not the first time that China's come head-to-head with the Philippines in this area. We've discussed the most recent aggressions, but now I want to explain why the South China Sea is such a hot zone for disputes. Later on, we'll also shed a light on how the USA is tangled up in all of this. The South China Sea is a sea in the western Pacific Ocean that is about 3.5 million square kilometers. Its positioning is the source of contention as it's right in the middle of these 6 nations. The sea is south of China and Taiwan, between Vietnam and the Philippines, and north of Brunei and Malaysia. It holds 2 groups of islands, the Spratly Islands in the south and the Paracel Islands in the north. As you can expect, the dispute is territorial, as all 6 countries claim a part of the sea and the islands within it. China's claim of the islands is the largest, demarcating it by the so-called 9-dash line. These lines are based on a 1936 map by Chinese cartographer Bai Meiqiu. The line comprises 9 dashes that extend hundreds of miles south and east from its most southerly province of Hainan. China also claims that the territory has been part of it for centuries, including the Paracel and Spratly Island chains. Outside of the territorial issues with the island, there are other things that have made the South China Sea worth the fight. The South China Sea is one of the busiest waterways for global trade, with ships carrying an estimated 30% of global crude oil through it. What's even more interesting is that its seabed is believed to hold huge oil and gas reserves. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the sea is estimated to have 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. It's also home to rich fishing grounds, and more than half of the world's fishing vessels operate in this area. The Paracels and the Spratlys have been rumored to have reserves of natural resources around them. Specifically for China, the South China Sea is its second most used sea lane in the world after the Dover Strait, and 60% of its total trade and 80% of its oil imports transit through the region. To add to its appeal on the tourism front, the islands of the South China Sea have a lot to offer. Beach resorts like the Philippines' Boracay have some stunning beaches and beautiful sunsets. The cruise tourism market is also booming, with ships operating from China, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines going into the sea. Having control over more islands in the region means being able to take a slice out of the tourism pie. Now, while all these things make the South China Sea a worthy territory, what's probably fueling the fire is the fact that the sea is such a strategic military location. Because the sea is so close to so many countries, many of them are looking to drop military bases and installations around islands and shoals. China's been camouflaging military ships on the sea, claiming that they're just fishing boats. Beijing's aim is for the ships to provide backup to the China Coast Guard and maintain a constant presence in remote waters. In addition to its military buildup, China has already built sea military bases on the Spratly Reefs while also flying its fighter jets above the sea. Now that we've looked at the reason for the numerous fights, let's trace out some of the earlier contentions for the South China Sea. China's aggression in the region and its claims have been a problem, as each of the 6 countries occupies at least one of the islands. As the CCP has become more militarized in its activities in the sea, Vietnam and the Philippines have been the 2 nations that have given China the most grief about its claims. In the 1900s, China and Vietnam fought for the region, with the two fighting for the Spratly and Paracel Islands. In 1974, China seized the Paracel Islands from South Vietnam, killing more than 75 Vietnamese soldiers in the process. In 2014, China moved an oil rig into Vietnamese waters, which sparked massive protests in Vietnam. What's worse is China's been known to arrest foreign fishermen and sailors in waters they consider to be their own. China's fights with Vietnam are few and spread out, but Manila and Beijing have been at each other's throats consistently throughout the years. In the early 2000s, the Philippines and China were at it, with things intensifying in 2013. Things got so bad that the Philippines filed a case against China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. After a long back and forth, the Philippines Foreign Minister Albert Del Rosario stated that the Philippines has exhausted almost all political and diplomatic avenues for a peaceful negotiated settlement of its maritime dispute with China. The Philippines wanted the court to rule on what territorial claims it was owed in the South China Sea, and to determine if China had infringed on its territorial rights through China's construction and fishing activities. Since China's a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Philippines hoped that they could be held accountable. China refused to take part in the case, claiming that UNCLOS was beyond its jurisdiction. On July 12, 2016, the arbitral tribunal adjudicating the case ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines, determining that major elements of China's claim, including its Nine-Dash Line, recent land reclamation activities, and other activities in Philippine waters, were unlawful. As you saw earlier in our discussion, the Second Thomas Shoal has been the main center of the dispute between China and the Philippines. The shoal is a reef that is about 124 miles from Palawan, Philippines, but more than 621 miles from China. It's been widely considered to belong to the Philippines because of how close it is to it. Unfortunately, China does not agree with this, despite the ruling by the International Tribunal that China had no legal rights to the shoal, which is in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The Philippines have had a military presence on the shoal since 1999, and they have no plans on moving anytime soon. The BRP Sierra Madre has been docked on it and has served as a base for some of its troops for many years. Despite this, China's been fighting for the tiny shoal, and many believe it's because its strategic location would be perfect for a naval base. Some even say that it could also be because the area has rich oil and gas reserves, but that is yet to be proved. This is all so messy, but now we're gonna take a detour to discuss US involvement in the matter. Although the US has no territorial claim in the South China Sea, they have been performing freedom of navigation exercises around the area. These are basically naval operations conducted by countries to demonstrate their rights to navigate through international waters. This is an international law right that's stated in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. One of the reasons behind this right is to challenge excessive maritime claims by asserting military presence and capabilities. The US has been carrying out these exercises in the South China Sea as a way of telling China to pipe down and show its influence. The US amped up its exercises under the Trump administration, and they've been sailing their vessels near or around features claimed by China. Washington's actions have been frustrating to Beijing, and in 2021, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said, "It is the United States which has actually militarized the area and threatened freedom of navigation." The country, over 8,300 miles from the South China Sea, has built several military bases with offensive weapons around the area, and frequently sent aircraft carriers and strategic bombers throughout the year. One of the major reasons that the US has gotten involved in this maritime dispute is that it has a stake in the sea remaining open. With the freedom of the seas principle under maritime law, the US can enjoy movement in trade and for its military pursuits. If China gets to claim the South China Sea as its territory, the US and many other nations will not be able to use the waterway freely. The Philippines is also an ally of the US, so their involvement in the area is also to maintain stability. They have a mutual defense treaty with the US, which means that if the contention of the South China Sea turns to war, the US would be obligated to step in. We also need to look at the fact that despite China's feelings that the US is overly involved, the US has really been trying to stay neutral. Beryl Nowens, an executive director for Asia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, states that Responding to coercive actions in the gray zone is difficult precisely because the lines between peace and conflict are blurred. What's ensured that the US has kept its antics to a minimum is the fact that it also has been trying to reduce its tension with China. President Biden has made it clear that he seeks only to have friendly competition with China, and that America is looking to consolidate a friendship with China. This means that the US is towing a delicate line, and the Philippines will probably have to keep fighting its own battles in the region. As the fights between the two nations escalate at an alarming rate, we need to start talking about what could happen next. Things could escalate further, as there are reports that Beijing wants to implement a new policy that would authorize the Chinese Coast Guard to detain foreigners crossing into waters claimed by China. This is a direct violation of international law, and it could see more than just the Philippines going head-to-head with China. In the meantime, the Philippines is not lying idle. Manila is working on deepening its alliance with Washington, and the two countries have carried out military drills together. This also took place on an island chain in the northern Philippines with the practice launch of an anti-cruise missile that sunk a decommissioned ship. While the US has been neutral till this point, a strengthening of the alliance could be a sign that it may be willing to act with the Philippines in the near future. The Philippines has been carrying out a number of security drills and signing agreements with other countries like Australia and Japan. Currently, Japan and the Philippines are discussing a reciprocal troop access agreement, and the Philippines and Australia have upgraded their cooperation in maritime security. The Philippines is doing a lot of leveling up on the military front, giving China a reason to be afraid. Currently, it's a waiting game, and the next act of aggression will show us the intentions of the two nations. At present, Manila continues to record each incident and publicize it for the world to see. By showing us who China really is, the Philippines is preparing for the time that it does actually hit back. When it finally pushes China out with military force, the international community will be able to understand what led to that point.